that really wonderful introduction. And it was nice to see our colleague at the Dean of the Sawyer School introducing and welcoming people to the conference as well. One of the key features of our and the dean alluded to this in her opening remarks, is the idea of trying to welcome as many as people as possible into the space of entrepreneurship and to employment opportunities in the life sciences sector. And as she noted, there are very enormous and exciting opportunities that can actually serve to improve the quality of life for a lot of people suffering from diseases and just sort of generally maintaining public health. Today in the news, for example, we learned that the scientists, three of the scientists at Vertex, which I recognize is not a startup anymore, but once upon a time it probably was, have just been received this very prestigious recognition and monetary prize for their work in developing the drugs that now can effectively treat cystic fibrosis, which heretofore was really, a very, people with that disease really kind of languished with a lot of maintenance, but not very effective treatments. So that just indicates what the opportunities are in this sector. So why did we wanted to have this panel to highlight some of the programs that are going on here at Suffolk and around the city that are aimed at diversifying entrepreneurship and employment opportunity in the life sciences, and how to make the life sciences industry sector more accessible. And as we said in our materials about this program, even though Massachusetts is recognized as a global leader in the life sciences, enabling access to opportunities in this space is really a work in progress. And there are several actors, and many actors probably in the city, who are actually trying to work to address that problem, to make sure that that access to these really wonderful careers, that opportunities in the sector are available to everyone who is interested. And so, for example, we'll get into this a little bit. Our colleagues at Mass Bio, the Mass Life Sciences Center, and other programs are specifically designed to help elevate entrepreneurs. Well, this is important because as earlier this month, Mass Bio actually released a study about employment opportunities in the life sciences sector. And even though the growth in the sector has slowed a little bit in the last couple of years, it still is one of the highest and fastest growing sectors of the economy. And so having people involved is a really important thing. So in order to discuss these issues, we have two really wonderful colleagues who are going to participate with us on the panel today. Nazma Rosado, who's on my far left, who is a principal consultant with Avion Consulting, and she also is an adjunct professor who teaches in the Master of Science in Law Life Sciences program here at Suffolk University Law School. She teaches the pharmaceutical development course. Then you see me, and I've already been introduced. And then to my immediate left is Heather Duffy, who is a graduate of Suffolk University Law School, but she, before coming to law school, had a very distinguished career in science and is now the chair of biotechnology at Franklin Cummings Technical Institute. So we'll talk to them about the activities that they're engaged in. Maybe we could have the next slide, please. But just to set up the conversation a little bit, here are some of the demographic trends on this slide and a few of the slides following that show what the representation is of women and people of color in the life sciences industry. And I want to thank my colleague Jen Karnakas for putting these slides together. So the first, can we go back to that previous one, please? There we go. On the left of the slide, it shows that all of these slides with these graphs show the percentage of degrees granted to the population identified in four-year degree programs. And so the left graph on this slide shows the percentage of degrees granted to women And then on the right of the slide, to Black or African American degree candidates. You see the number, there's a majority of women, but then the number becomes very small. On the women, I would say that one comment is that then if we think about the industry, the representation of women in the industry then drops off quite markedly. So with this percentage of degree recipients, that's, kind of an interesting question and problem to solve. Now we could have the next slide. Thanks. And then these two slides show the degrees granted to people who identify as Hispanic graduates in the life sciences, and then Asian or Asian American graduates in the life sciences. And the light blue bars, I should say, are Massachusetts graduates, and the dark blue bars are the US total nationwide. Okay, the next slide, please. I think maybe I will stop here and allow my colleague Heather to talk about these statistics here on the earning potential of biotechnology.
Thank you. So these are two graphs that just show what the earning potential was in 2020, and then again in 2022, showing that while overall people look at the industry and say, gosh, it slowed down a little bit, it's actually still roaring, even though it has slowed down a little bit. In Massachusetts, the average or median salary is up to about $64,000 as a starting median salary, and that would be sort of mid-scientist range. But what I'm actually focused on more is what's down at that lowest earner. So if you look at the lowest earner range here, it's still about $40,000 as a starting salary. That's a really good starting salary for somebody coming into an entry-level job, particularly if you come from a family that has been traditionally low income, or you are a first generation or non-generation college, so you have nobody in your family that has ever gone to college. That's a very good starting salary. So one of the reasons that we focus on this sector is because of the potential that this sector has for overcoming some of the wage gaps that we see here in Boston and beyond. And again, similar to what Renee has shown, the blue is here in Suffolk County, and the yellow is the nation overall. So Suffolk County, being the heart of biotech, at least they like to think so, really is a great place to have this. Next slide, please. The problem comes when you look at the numbers here. This breaks down who's in biotech a little bit more than what Renee showed. So the blue is the US population as a whole. So if you look at the Caucasian or white population, we make up about 61% of the total population in the United States. And in biotech, which is in red, we make up about 60% of the biotech workforce. But if you look at who's in biotech management in green, about 75% of biotech management are Caucasian. And if you look at who's on the boards, that pops up to 80%. 80% of us on the boards are white. So now if you look by US population and you go to the Hispanic Latino, it's 17% of the population identifies as Hispanic Latino, but only 6% of the biotech workforce is of that self-identification. Now if you go to management, it's vanishingly small. It's 3.8%. And if you go to the board, I think that's one person. Like 1.7% of board members identify as Hispanic Latino. And if you go to the Black African American identifications, they're slightly smaller US population, 13.3%. Little bit better in the biotech workforce, 6.9. It's still vanishingly small. But it's worse in management, 3.1%. A little bit better on boards, 5.2. An interesting statistic here is that the Asian population is 5.7% of the United States, and they're overrepresented in all of these categories. It's not a bad thing. It's just an interesting point. And then all others, which include Native Americans and other identifications, are the last set of bars. So what we can see by looking at this graphic is that we have a long way to go to even out who is in the management and who are on the boards. And why do we need that? Because we need to guide our medical development from startups all the way to big pharma in a manner that represents not just the people working there, but the patients that they serve. So with that, I'll turn it back to Renee. Next slide.
Great. So this slide, this next two slides just demonstrate some of the other organizations who are trying to address this this issue of creating greater opportunities so that there is better representation of all of the people in the country in the biotech and life sciences sector. We have Mass Bio, I won't read the slide to you, but which is a nonprofit organization representing the life sciences industry and its educational foundation, Mass BioEd, and then the Mass Life Sciences Center, which also is actually more specifically focused on the startup and entrepreneurial community and creating opportunities there, with a program, a platform for providing internship opportunities and things like that. Why don't we go to the next slide, please? There we go. Oops. Back one. There we go. And then two more organizations that are really trying to work on this. And this, all of these activities, I just want to say, are taking place in a larger public policy context. There's one of the other organizations that I am involved in is the Health Equity Compact, which is advocating for a very enormous package of legislation before the Massachusetts legislature now to really focus on solving some of the disparities issues in access and the outcomes for healthcare. And one of the areas of focus is workforce development, creating a more diverse and broad-based healthcare workforce for the reasons that Heather mentioned in her in her presentation, her discussion of the statistics. And then another organization in the city, Mass General Brigham, is engaged in one massive construction project just up Cambridge Street from Suffolk University, where we're sitting right now, to build a brand new state-of-the-art art inpatient hospital building for Mass General Hospital. And one of the organization perceived that this was an opportunity to really try to focus on being an anchor organization in the city to make sure that the benefits from the construction contracts and all the ancillary activities related to the construction should flow to people in the Boston community. And it has a three-pronged approach to trying to deal with these issues. One is to really try to focus on bringing more opportunities for underutilized business enterprises into the projects, including minority-owned, women-owned, and veteran-owned businesses in the project, to create workforce development, to really ask the contractors to take innovative strategies to increase diversity. And then finally, youth engagement, creating internship and educational programs. So that that is a very useful. And so anyway, I'm just saying that this discussion is taking place in this larger context. Can we have the next slide, please? There we go. And so what is one role that Suffolk is trying to play in this process, and which is we created about 3 years ago, the Master of Science in Law Life Sciences program, which is a graduate level program for people seeking to gain knowledge and tools needed to pursue or to advance a career in the life sciences sector. It's a multidisciplinary program that combines, the skills and the insights of our colleagues from all three of the major components of the university, the law school, the business school, and the sciences and the arts and sciences school, and really does prepare people for a career in the life sciences. So maybe now, maybe I can turn to, we might have to skip ahead. Well, actually, no, we won't do that. We won't skip ahead because that might be complicated for the slides, but maybe go back to Heather and she can talk about the program that she is running, which is kind of at the other end of the pipeline. And then we'll go to Nazma Rosado, who will talk about her involvement in our master's program, and then her other activities in this life sciences sector.
Thank you. So I'll go very quick over this first part. I want you to think about why it's so important to increase diversity in STEM. It's more than just saying we need to be fair. So I'm going to tell you one quick story. If you could go back to that slide just for a minute. So when one of the major drugs for asthma is albuterol. I take albuterol myself. I have bad asthma. It's given routinely to all children, particularly inner city children where asthma is very bad. Unfortunately, albuterol, there is no receptor for albuterol in a large number of Puerto Ricans or in some subsets of African Americans. It's genetically does not work in these populations. It's still given to them. And parents come back over and over and over again and say it's not helping. And the doctors say, well, of course it's working. It works in everybody. So why did that happen and how did that happen? Well, it happened because persons of color are generally not included in clinical trials for a number of reasons. One, I think they have a very reasonable, healthy suspicion of clinical trials in this country. And I think that's reasonable, but that's not going to change until the doctors that they see doing the clinical trials represent their families, represent their communities, and represent them as a whole. So we cannot do well by our patients until we are the patient, right? So we need doctors, scientists, and other persons of color in the room talking about this if we're going to make medicines that affect persons of color.
Can I offer one other recent example is the pulse oximeter?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Which, you read the instructions on the pulse oximeters you buy at the drugstore and they say, it doesn't work so well if you have dark nail polish, that kind of thing. Well, it actually doesn't work so well with dark skin either. And so it was, this came to light really in full force with COVID, because measuring the, oxygen levels in blood became very important to determine whether, how serious people were suffering from COVID. And so now there is a, group of scientists of color who are working on trying to make a better pulse oximeter that does not have this problem. But it was leading to the undertreatment of a lot of people who have darker skins because the pulse oximeter was not giving accurate readings of their oxygen levels in the blood.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's another very, very good example of why we need people in the room. And another short one is that vaccines often will affect women different than men based on the time of their cycle. So where do they think they test vaccines? They test them in mice, but they won't use female mice because in the estrus cycle of the mouse, the vaccine results change and that disrupts their data. So they just threw out all the female mice, which makes no sense. So we have to get over that by having people in the room going, wait, we need to test this on female mice because female humans have that variation and we should look at that. So if we go to the reason that we're going to look at my program is what are we trying to do about this for persons of backgrounds where college is not expected, college is not affordable. The thought of going to a four-year college right out of high school is a little bit daunting. We're developing an on-ramp program to a lifelong education. So this is an associate's degree in biotechnology at Franklin Cummings Tech. It is developed in coordination with Northeastern so that there is a continuation into a four-year degree if they wish. So next slide, please. This is not just a lab program where you can learn to do lab work. We are training scientists. So we do have molecular biology 1 and 2, CMC. We have microbiology, virology, but the really important part of this is we also are teaching scientific communication, data analytics, statistics, and all the things you need to become an actual scientist, and not just what we used to call, when I had postdocs, apologies to all you postdocs out there, lab rats. And working with partners, as Renee pointed out, Life Science Cares, we are working with their on-ramp program to do 2 paid internships with the same company in hope that we can ramp them right into jobs at graduation. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Mass Life Sciences, who's given us a $750,000 equipment grant for our programs. We have also just been awarded a beta testing site for virtual reality laboratories. So they will become part of our Good Lab Practices course to teach safety and handling of hazardous waste. Next slide. But really the purpose of our program is to develop an on-ramp to a sustainable scientific career. The reality is while I think certificate programs are great add-ons if you need training, they should not be the only training you have, because what happens when things get automated, you lose your job and it's not sustainable. So we want to produce work-ready scientists, not just lab hands. And like I said, we're developing this program with Northeastern so that once our students go out and they're working, they can continue their education at Northeastern at no cost, so that they can continue to the 4-year degree. Many larger companies, and I would encourage entrepreneurs at startups as you get bigger to try to find a way to help people continue their education. They will pay for part of the tuition. There are grants for smaller companies to help people do this. It's really important to keep people learning for their whole life. And the focus really is to provide skills beyond the basic lab skills, the thought process, the communication process, and the dissemination process. These are the translatable and transferable scientific skills that people need to have sustainable scientific careers. And that's what we are aiming to produce. Next slide. I think that's it.
I think that's you. That's
Thank
your
you.
last slide. Thank you, Heather. Already we see from Heather's discussion the connection between, specific educational programs and internship opportunities and some of these organizations that I had on my earlier slides. And Nazma Rosado will talk about some other examples of that interface. And as I mentioned before, she, has multiple roles on this panel. One is her own, professional experience. Another is her role in as an adjunct faculty member in our MSLL program, teaching pharmaceutical development. And then finally, her role as an instructor with some of the mass bioed programs. So please, Ms. Nazma.
Absolutely. So just to begin, I wanted to reflect on some of the data that was shared previously. When we think about different communities and how well they're served and such, I mean, I'm a first generation, right, when it comes to college degrees. I'm a minority, I'm female, and I come from a lower income family.
So what are you doing? How'd you get?
How'd I get here? A lot of luck and hard work. But, I'm very passionate about this topic because I want it to not require so much luck, right? I want there to be pathways that are obvious and available to folks. So for me, it's just having great mentors and finding just, professors and such who helped me on my journey. And it's been a journey. It's been a winding road. I'm now a consultant and have sort of left the industry, but I worked in biotech and pharma for 27 years and absolutely loved being in that industry because it is, there's lots that can be said about the industry, but it is all in the service of finding curative and preventative medications, right? So I just really felt very close to that. And interestingly, with Heather's little story about albuterol, my husband is Puerto Rican. Some of my children are half Puerto Rican, and I have twins. One of my twins yesterday was prescribed albuterol. So I'm going to have to really keep a close eye and see if it's working or not. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, it has been a wonderful career, and it's been a fantastic journey. But again, it has been definitely taking the scenic route. And if there's a way to make it more direct and more available, then let's do that. Working in biotech and pharma, I fully understand, much of what was already said with regards to an underrepresentation of the people doing the work, right? But also of the communities that we are testing. And when Heather mentioned that there's a healthy concern or maybe some skepticism with regards to medications and such, it's founded in reality, right? I mean, if you think back to like the Tuskegee trials and some of those things, as an adjunct professor teaching pharmaceutical development here at Suffolk, I've had students say, hey, look, I'm not going to take any vaccines because I know about Tuskegee. Or we'll get to that topic and they'll say, well, they targeted an underserved community of Black men. As a Black man, I don't feel comfortable with that, right? And I can't, and nor do I choose to or have any desire to argue against that. It's valid, right? That's an experience that's part of our industry. But what are we doing to change it, right? So following Tuskegee, we put some regulations in place so that we wouldn't do those kinds of things anymore. But aside from the regulations that keeps us from acting in an unethical manner, how are we making sure we're putting the right people into the right positions so that there's diversity of thought, right? A different lens to look at everything that we're looking through. So that's one element. And then when you think about just the female impact, if you think back, if you know the history of the drug thalidomide, right? It was used widely in Europe, but never really in the US. And the reason for that is there was a physician at the FDA named Dr. Frances Kelsey, a female, who wasn't really comfortable with the data. She felt like there wasn't enough for us to go ahead and approve it for use in the US. Thalidomide was a drug that was used by women during pregnancy to calm the effects of nausea, right? It was extremely effective in treating morning sickness nausea. And what ended up happening is as babies were born whose mothers had taken thalidomide while they were pregnant, they were born with severe deformities. And it's really a very sad situation. But because we had this female, and I'm not saying only because she's female, but she was really thinking of it in terms of, well, are we thinking about what is this doing to the unborn child? Have we looked at that? Do we have any data on that? And she really caused the US to not approve that drug for use in this country because of her concerns thinking of it as a mother. Right. So that's why we need to have these different, kinds of populations and different ideas, and people who think of things in different ways. It's not to say that there isn't a man who could have thought of it. It just happened to have been a woman who said, as a mother, I'm worried about what is this doing to the child within those women. Interestingly, that drug is used in the US today, but not for morning sickness. It's used for in combination with chemotherapy and some other things to stave off the effects of nausea.
But one of the indications is you have to have a negative pregnancy test before
Yes.
every dosage is administered. And so, yeah.
And
yeah.
you also have to agree to be on contraception during
Yeah.
the time that you're taking that medication. So, there are things that we've put in place to prevent those types of missteps or errors. But on the other end of it, moving forward, right, as science continues to evolve and as we continue to delve into new areas and all kinds of diseases evolve and come to fruition, how are we making sure that we have that diversity of thought, in the decision makers? So as far as, my role, I am someone who feels like if you have a complaint about something, do something to change it. And so seeing that I felt that we were an underserved community in any aspect of my past that you want to choose from, being a minority, being a female, or even, coming from a lower socioeconomic class, there's a lot of opportunities that exist that we're not aware of, and there are a lot of opportunities that do not exist. And so we need to create both awareness and opportunity. So working with Suffolk University Law School's MSLL program, I've been able to really connect with, some of these wonderful folks here locally who are either in a Suffolk program working towards their JD or otherwise, or sometimes folks who are out in the industry, people who are like working in the labs, working in manufacturing, and they're interested in learning more and getting that MSLL degree and sort of furthering their career. It's a seminar type program, which allows us to really have some great conversations and really get into topics about ethics as well as the science and the regulatory pathways and all of that. We're really coming together in combination to show what's possible, right? Like if you think about healthcare as a whole, more broadly than just pharma and biotech, there's everything, right? We need lawyers, we need people in human resources, we need people in manufacturing, we need there's just every type of role that you can think of exists in that industry, and it's a high paying industry. When I think about Renee's first slide looking at those starting salaries, I can just remember very clearly my first salary out of college was $23,700. And so if there was a possibility, and that was with a degree from a good university, if there was a possibility of starting off in the 40s or high 30s, that's progress, right? As far as where we can have it in our starting salaries. And that's just at the beginning, because you get so much experience and you escalate very quickly in these industries as well. So as far as other opportunities, Renee talked about Mass Bio Ed. And so I teach several courses for Mass Bio Ed. We do biotechnology project management, which is a course that gives you enough continuing education credits towards getting your PMP certification, so your project management professional certification from the Project Management Institute. But it has a biotechnology lens on it. So our case studies, our scenarios, all of that is meant to help everyone leave the class, go back to work or start off into the industry and have an understanding of how to apply that, right, in a real world sort of example. I mean, we could use scenarios about, planning a wedding, which is fun and interesting and exciting and relatable, but it's not going to help you as much when you're back at your desk, unless if you are in fact planning a wedding. I also teach for them molecule to market, which is soup to nuts, right? From discovery through development, post-launch. What do we do in our industry? Just how does it all come together? What are the regulations and all of that? So it's a great sort of intro course if you're interested in learning a little bit more about this part of healthcare and if it might be a place for you. The business of biotech is very similar to molecule to market, but that one, we actually teach it for the apprentices. So Mass Bio has an apprenticeship program, which looks at candidates who are from what they consider to be non-traditional backgrounds. So you might have, when I teach that class, I spend a lot of time just spending it on introducing one another and getting to know each other. Because what we will often hear from folks as they introduce themselves is they'll say, well, I just have a career in retail, or I've only worked in, driving an Uber, or, I've only worked at restaurants. And I try to get them to get away from that language where they're diminishing what they've done. And I try to help them connect it to what we do in the industry, which is everything is customer facing and everything is in customer service, right? So you already have skills that are applicable. You just think that you don't. And then as we go through, I started outlining some of the competencies that are successful in, any industry, right? And because as my day job is I work as a consultant and I do a lot of executive coaching and leadership development. And so I sort of bring that into the courses I teach in talking about how do you influence without authority, right? How do you communicate professionally? How do you make decisions and how do you problem solve, right? Some real honest things about how do you function in the corporate world in a way that allows you to tap into your experiences related to other issues and people, and really start seeing yourself in a different light. Because I think part of what holds us back, aside from lack of opportunities and lack of awareness, is also lack of self-confidence, right? I mean, the number one thing that everyone has, like every single person, is imposter syndrome. And it lives in our head and it tells us we're not good enough for some reason. And the truth is, if we can overcome that, then we can really see we can fit into any space and be absolutely amazing at it. So in these courses for Mass Bio Ed, for Suffolk, even for the Year Up program, which is another one that looks at, students who are out of high school and, looking at getting into a career space, we talk about all of these things. We talk about the needs of the industry. We talk about the strength of healthcare. We talk about how applicable various skills are. And we definitely talk about how necessary it is to have people that look in every different, variety, right? We want to see if you're short, if you're tall, if you're yellow, if you're brown, like it doesn't matter. We need diversity of all sorts. And we need people to really, be comfortable and confident in raising their voices and saying, this doesn't seem right, feel right, sound right, or look right. Right. Feel free to say, I think we need to maybe include more people of, this or that sector. And so that's a lot of the work that I've been doing, really helping to foster that with individuals. On the other side, part of my consulting role, I work with startup companies and with PE and venture capital firms as well to help level up the leadership in those organizations so that they are more aware of the need for these greater opportunity development, activities, but also so that they're performing at their best, right? If you have a brilliant scientist who has started up a company with some other brilliant scientists, they may be absolutely fantastic at that science, but they may not have led people in the past. And now suddenly they're getting funding and they're growing and they have different, stakeholders that they need to collaborate with. And they don't really have that skill developed because they've spent their entire career in a lab speaking amongst each other and not really, unless if they're doing industry presentations or whatnot. How did they take that science and speak in layperson's terms, right? So everyone else kind of understands what's exciting about it. So I do some of that work in helping, private equity and venture capital firms who are backing startups say, hey, we can use a coach to help this C-suite to really get to the level of competency that we need them to be to strongly further this organization, right? So I'm trying to approach it from both ends, folks coming into the industry and then also at that entrepreneurial, place, helping to make sure they have the skills they need to be solid leaders and then to pay that forward, right? To start thinking about as they expand and grow, what do they need as far as, bringing in a new talent? What does that talent need to look like and what do they need to bring to the table?
So that's very helpful, Nazma. And the skills that you're talking about, the communication skills, the management skills are really important for any technical field where, you need to kind of translate the information and provide it to people who aren't experts in the field. So it could be true for financial information, legal information, and as well as scientific information. So it's not, we're not talking, rocket science here. We're really talking really what, these skills that the technical person needs to develop to be able to communicate effectively
Right.
with people who are not experts in all of these areas. Heather, did you want to make any comments on how the discussion has progressed?
Well, no, I think that Nazma makes a lot of really, really good points. I mean, I was a scientist before I came to Suffolk Law School. I had no idea how the world really ran. I was classically trained scientist. I got my PhD at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. I did a postdoc. I did a faculty here, a faculty there. I ended up as faculty at Harvard Medical School. I could not speak to a business person if you paid me extra money to do it. So it took me a while. It took me coming here, going to law school, realizing that that's not how everybody spoke, to really learn how to change hats, which is very important in startups, to wear many hats and to speak to many people at many different levels. So these types of things that Nazma is doing are incredibly important as you move through a career. And so we do need this type of educational on-ramping all the way from start to finish to get everybody to the finish line.
Both of you have mentioned, and you just now, Heather, specifically how in a startup, people have to take on all kinds of different roles. What would you say to a person who's thinking about, where if I have choices about how to enter the life sciences industry, what factors would you tell them they should consider, in considering whether to join a startup or a more established, I mentioned Vertex already, Vertex, Takeda, any of the bigger companies. What would you say to them? What advice?
So I would say, first of all, look for the thing that sort of feeds your passion, right? If the science is interesting to you or meaningful to you in some way, right? So if you're working with a company that is looking at orphan drugs, and cystic fibrosis being an orphan drug is something that maybe you have a close connection to, go work for that company, right? Because you're going to want to get up every morning and get to work. So definitely find and follow your passion. With regards to, do you go to a small startup where you wear many hats, or do you go to a more established organization where there's more structure? It has to do with your level of comfort as well. I think, in a startup, it's so exciting and you learn a tremendous amount in a short amount of time because you're doing everything and you're doing it all together. And it's just, the most wonderful way to learn a tremendous amount in a short amount of time. However, if you're uncomfortable with uncertainty and you're uncomfortable with change, then if you go to some place that's a little bit more established, where there's processes, roles are really clearly defined, and there's, training and, mentorship that's in place, that might be a more comfortable place for you to go. So I think it all boils down to know thyself, right? And what's really going to be necessary for you to be your best self, and then select that way.
Yeah, I definitely think you should go for your passion. I think one other thing to think about with startups, especially if you are just coming out of high school and you're getting one of these internships or college degree, startups have an unfortunate fail rate. Not because they're not good, not because their science isn't good, but just because that's the nature of the beast. And if you need a stable job, startup is probably not the first job you want to get. You want to go somewhere where your job is stable and you can learn several skills so that you can take that, and then you can dive into the startup market when you've got a little bit more breathing room. If you are super passionate, I would say go to the startup anyway, because then you can startup hop, which is what a lot of people do. I've worked at startups that were literally me and 2 other people on Zoom. But I've also worked at Shire, which became Takeda. So it's really about where your passion is and what you're interested in doing. But I will say the stability is better at the larger companies.
And just to put a finer point on it, one of the opportunities for people just starting out, if they go to a startup, is that you get thrown in to do things that really are, you're underwater because you have no training, you've never done them before, and it's a way to ramp up your skills really quickly if you embrace the opportunity. But it's also, you have to be cautious because, you want to avoid making really tragic mistakes when you're.
I was just going to add, sometimes you're doing it when nobody in the company has ever done it before. So, but it's actually very exciting. And that's why a lot of times these certificate programs can be great, because you can go add a certificate in that area and bring it back to the company, and then you're really value added.
Right. I think that's the case. Well, maybe we should see if there are questions. Do we have an audience online still, or any comments, experiences people want to share, or people in the room have any comments, questions? We have a question up here.
So I'm going to hand
Wait
the
a minute.
microphone to you,
There's going to be a microphone.
And what's your name?
My name is Hassam. I'm a scientist with BCA. I was working in industry. There's been a lot of layoffs, so I'm out of it right now. But getting back in seems to be way more difficult than it was before, because there's a lot of me's everywhere as well. So what do you recommend or what are your advice for people right now in my situation that are trying to get back in, that are still relatively early in their biotech career, like maybe they have 1, maybe 2 year experience at most, and they're trying to get back in, but industry is a little tough, well, tougher than it was before, at least.
I will say that the best thing you can do is skill up, which is to find some skill that is very valuable right now and do one of these certificate programs in that skill. There's a lot of scholarship for them so that you don't end up paying a lot for them. Bioinformatics is one that's very hot right now. If you like to play computer games, it's a great one. But, you know, and biomanufacturing is still very hot. It's not one of the areas that's slowing down. So if you can skill up in the biomanufacturing, quality control, supply chain. So looking for those types of programs to get yourself a certificate in them is going to help you tremendously, I think.
I was going to say the exact same thing. I see a lot. I know there's been a lot of layoffs in the industry. And you know, our industry is that's just part of it, because there's so many mergers and acquisitions that occur as just a normal, you know, ebb and flow of our industry. So I've been laid off many times. And it's just, you know, it's challenging to get out there and to find the right next opportunity, especially if you're younger in your career. But I was going to say, exactly as Heather mentioned, biomanufacturing is still pretty hot. And supply chain also is a space where since 2020, there's been a lot of growth. So those are two areas to look at. I've seen a lot of more senior tenured folks become independent consultants because they're sort of not really finding the right thing. But even with those individuals, what I've seen is a lot of upskilling. I've seen several people who have gotten like that project management certification, because you can use it really in any role, right? I've seen an uptick in different certifications that people are posting, on LinkedIn. I would also say, mentioning LinkedIn, use your network, really leverage your network. There's always going to be an opportunity where, you're going to need help. There's just times, and we're so, we just don't use that as often as we should, and really just sort of phoning a friend and saying, hey, do you know of any opportunities? Because sometimes you hear things passively and you don't really think much about it because it's not for you. But if someone else brings that to you, it's suddenly, oh, wait, I might know someone, right? Get to know people who are really well connected, right? That's just, I'm always growing my network. At every opportunity I have, I'm growing my network, because there are things that I might need to call upon someone for. And there's a ton of things that I'm more than happy to help if someone reaches out to me. So I would invest in that. And I would say, the other thing is to use this time not only for upskilling and for looking at different parts of the industry, but also for thinking about what is it about what you do that you greatly enjoy, and then see if there's a way of repurposing it, right? So if it's pure science, then okay, looking specifically in those science labs, and just looking at different kinds of incubators and such. And the other thing that I would say, just in closing on this topic or for this question, it's that, as I mentioned, there's an ebb and flow to our industry. It's really not been fantastic last year, this year, and I will tell you, 2024 is not going to be great either. It's an election year, and so organizations are going to be really careful in the decisions they make, and scaling up is not something that people are comfortable with when they're not sure what policies and regulations and stuff might look like, depending on who's in the hot seat. But in 2025, it should start picking back up. And if you just look at the industry trends of just the normal flow and the rhythm of things, that's about when industry should start kind of kicking back in. So there's also a little bit of have faith. We go through this constantly. And for those of us who've been in it for quite a while, we can tell you it always comes around, right? So how do you fill that gap in that time? Upskill and look for opportunities by using your network.
I was going to mention the networking thing as well, in the context of when you're working in that startup and you get that project that you have absolutely no idea what to do with, but somebody needs to do it like right now. That's when your network is really important, to get advice from colleagues, your mentors, people you went to school with who took a different path. It's really, really important. And also, obviously, in the networking for finding, your next opportunity. I think that's really important as well. That was a really good, excellent question. And I wish you luck in pursuing that next opportunity. Because I know it's a challenging time. I actually have, someone who's related to one of my family members who's actually in this situation of, trying to find the next thing, who's much more senior. And that in some ways is more difficult because that person is much more expensive than someone who's just starting out. So that creates a different set of challenges.
Any more questions in the room? We have one more. And what's your name, sir?
Hi, thank you for sharing your ideas. My name is Tamana Tadala. I have a question, two questions I have. One is like, what is the best way to, after working like a global public work and coming back to biotechnology, because I wanted to changing the careers and then see how I can also creating some values on the biotechnology, especially here in Boston areas, like for the minority groups, like how the biotechnology could be a good fit for the learning and working environment.
Yeah, so I would say, again, it doesn't really matter what your past history and experiences. There are skills that you have that are translatable, right? So identify really what are your skills, and then, how do you then best present yourself in light of those skills? I think if you're interested in some of what we talked about today, as far as, creating and connecting the right people with the right opportunities, I would also look at places like MassBio, right? Look at the industry organizations that exist. It doesn't have to be necessarily a company that is a biotech or a pharma company. It can be one of the industry institutions or organizations that work in support and in partnership with the industry. So broaden the search a bit in that sense.
And the disease organizations too, the disease advocacy organizations are also good sources, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say it really depends on what aspect. If you want to get into the laboratory science aspect, you do need laboratory science background. But you can find programs, a lot of them here in Boston, that are doing, including ours and yours, that are teaching the science that you need for the background to enter into that. But there's so many others, and I was going to say this to you as well, is the regulatory field. If you have a science background and you like to write, the regulatory fields are great. But also, for example, I work with the Rett Syndrome Research Trust, and what they do is they're a granting agency that helps fund research into Rett syndrome, which is a terrible neurodegenerative disease. And so those types of foundations, they need people who are interested in science and can help, get data together and things like that. So there are a lot of areas in our field that you don't have to be directly in the laboratory. But you can be in the life sciences career. You can go into legal work. Boy, do we use lawyers. You can be a patent agent. You can be a patent attorney. I know a patent attorney who personally takes home over about $1,000 an hour. She doesn't work often anymore.
No, I would imagine not.
She's retired. She only comes in for very, very important litigation cases because she always wins. But it's, if you want to go to law school, Suffolk is a great law school. I went there here. But there's many, many areas you can be in the biotech world. You can be in the business side, right? It's really important to understand how business works and still be in biotechnology.
I would also say, that there are myriad jobs in academic medicine and in government that also are, some of them maybe won't pay quite as well as in the, the private industry sector. And then having that experience, especially in the government experience, can make you attractive to private companies in the regulatory compliance space because you understand how the agencies think, what they're, you know how to navigate, through those processes in the agencies. And I think that, people often discount those kinds of jobs, but they can be very important in helping build a career.
Yeah, they also help if you want to go out and be a consultant. If you've worked for the government agencies, worked for FDA, worked in any of that area, you can become a consultant and do quite well.
Well, I think that we are at time. I really want to appreciate and all of you for coming today, and we say that we really appreciate your questions and your attention, and thank you to Startup Boston again for including us in the conversation about opportunities in the life sciences sector. And please join me in thanking our panelists as well for a really good discussion here today.
You do my job for me. I appreciate you.